Bueno, ahora vamos a escuchar la conferencia del doctor Kenneth Cocroco. Él es profesor asistente de la Escuela de Arquitectura y Paisajismo de la Universidad de Arizona. Kenneth Cocroco es arquitecto paisajista con experiencia en la dirección de procesos de planificación y diseño basados en la comunidad para proyectos de planificación de parques, espacios abiertos y barrios. Su experiencia en investigación en antropología, ciencias ambientales y desarrollo comunitario aporta una perspectiva fresca y holística a su enfoque de diseño. A través de su trabajo en proyectos comunitarios, Kenneth se apasionó por conectar de forma significativa a las personas en el entorno construido, para mejorar los resultados sociales y ecológicos. Su formación multidisciplinar y su experiencia en la colaboración con socios comunitarios de diversos orígenes también ha influido en su enfoque de aplicación de estrategias de compromiso, planificación y diseño equitativos e inclusivos para el desarrollo de espacios públicos abiertos. Como firme defensor de la justicia racial y medioambiental en el diseño, el enfoque de Kenneth encarna una crítica de las prácticas de diseño históricas y una redefinición vital de lo que significa el éxito del diseño en un contexto comunitario. Entonces, bueno, demos la bienvenida al doctor Kenneth Cocroco. Después de su intervención, habrá un espacio para preguntas por parte del público. Muchas gracias. Adelante, Kenneth.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me pretty good. Let me know if not. Well, welcome and thank you for that introduction, Jose Manuel. Before I begin, I want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here. And I want to give a special thanks to Adriana and Manuel for inviting me here to speak today. I also want to say thank you to the students who will be sharing their work and who represent the future professionals, scholars, and leaders who will shape a more sustainable, a more just, and a more equitable built environment. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the project sponsors and extend my heartfelt appreciation and respect for the community collaborators that have shared their own expertise and knowledge along the way. As Manuel stated already, my name is Kenneth Cocroco. I'm a landscape architect and assistant professor of landscape architecture at the University of Arizona. I'm pleased to be here today to share this talk on green infrastructure and to explore the role it can play in achieving not only environmental benefits, but social benefits and community strengthening outcomes for communities that have historically been disadvantaged by inequitable development based simply on their race, their ethnic or cultural background, or their socioeconomic status. So without further ado, please allow me to share an overview of the presentation. To begin, I'll give some background on green infrastructure, or GI, to set the stage, and then a discussion of the relationship between green infrastructure and equity, followed by an example of how implementation of GI can contribute to equitable development for underserved communities. So, what is green infrastructure? Well, if you don't know, the term green infrastructure refers to the many different types of interventions in the built environment and is used as a catch-all phrase for many things. In a general sense, it's a network of natural spaces, parks, greenways, and trails, or other green spaces. But more specifically, as defined by the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act here in the United States, green infrastructure is the range of plant or soil systems, permeable pavements, stormwater harvest and reuse, or landscaping to store, infiltrate, and evapotranspirate stormwater, and also to reduce flows to sewer systems or to surface waters. Now, that's a really complex definition, but under this more specific definition, green infrastructure is also known as green stormwater infrastructure, or GSI. So those are the textbook definitions, but probably more important is the question of what's the point? Well, in cities where most of the world's population lives, the built environment is dominated by impervious surfaces like roads, parking lots, buildings, and other hardscape spaces. Because of this, the amount of stormwater runoff during extreme rain events can be massive. And stormwater runoff is a term that just refers to When water falls on the ground, it's not absorbed and it actually just moves across the surface. So this poses a significant problem because often stormwater runoff is also concentrated for faster removal from city streets via pipes and eventually channelized drainages. Increasingly, this means of conveyance is not capable of managing the types of intense storm events many cities are seeing more frequently due to climate change. And this image is a good example of that. The resulting impacts include, as we see here, flooding, displacement of residents, damage to both public and private property, and substantial costs associated with repair and rebuilding. Additionally, this type of stormwater management can have negative environmental impacts as nutrients, sediments, and pollutants are carried off and into streams, rivers, lakes, and other natural water bodies. So GSI can mitigate some of these problems by controlling the amount and speed of travel of stormwater runoff. It can also reduce environmental pollutants, like I mentioned, by preventing those nutrients, sediment, and from reaching natural water resources and causing problems such as algal blooms or other chemical imbalances. And it's worth noting that GSI can provide numerous other benefits such as cooling, improving air quality, sequestering carbon, and providing habitat for animals or recreation opportunities for humans. Now, there are many different types of GSI, some of which you might be familiar with, and some that you may have seen and not even realize were in fact stormwater infrastructure. These include design elements like rain gardens, like we see here, bioretention facilities, green roofs, rain barrels, ponds, and wetlands. And these elements can be either implemented individually, say along a city street, or mixed and matched as part of larger projects, like in the images shown here of the University of Arizona College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture's Underwood Family Sonoran Landscape Laboratory. So now, with kind of that background, I'd like to delve a little deeper and take a look at some examples where these elements are actually integrated into public space designs. Sam, you'll let me know if there's an issue. Is that okay? Can you watch the chat? Somebody? Okay. All right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with the George Dock Cavalier Park, which is a 34-acre public park nestled in the desert surroundings of Scottsdale, Arizona. The site boundaries include a previously established stormwater retention facility and undisturbed desert habitat. The design successfully preserves open space and upgrades stormwater management capacity while providing a park that can be easily maintained and enjoyed by residents into the future. Notable GSI benefits include capturing and infiltrating 100% of stormwater generated on site from a 100-year, 2-hour storm event. And the site also manages runoff from several upstream developments with a storage capacity of almost 50 acre-feet. Just one image, sorry. Next, we visit Houston, Texas, and the Buffalo Bayou Promenade, which is a 23-acre park and recreation area that transformed an overgrown, trash-filled urban gray field into a thriving waterfront. This $15 million landmark project both improved flood control capacity and transformed a marginal space beneath the freeway, as you can see here, into a safe, welcoming place for pedestrians, cyclists, and other recreational users. Notable GSI benefits include increasing the flood storage capacity of the promenade section of the bayou by over 18.5 acre-feet, and improving the channel's ability to withstand stormwater velocity by 400%, thus reducing damaging effects of high flow events in the stream channel. And finally, to Detroit, Michigan, where once a brownfield site underlaid with contaminated soil and abandoned infrastructure, the William G. Milliken State Park is Michigan's first state park in an urban setting. You can see it's located just inside of downtown Detroit. The Lowland Park shown here is the second phase of a 31-acre open space and completed in 2010. The 6-acre parcel provides river access and connects the old Tricentennial State Harbor to Rivard Plaza and the rest of the Riverwalk in downtown. Notable GSI benefits include filtering an anticipated 100% of surface runoff, totaling 4.5 million gallons annually from 12.5 acres of developable properties adjacent to the site, and removing an anticipated 99% of sediment, 91% of phosphorus, 74% of nitrogen, 97% of lead, and 91% of copper from surface runoff from surrounding parcels, preventing those pollutants from entering the Detroit River. So you might be thinking, well, those are beautiful projects, and I can see how they help manage stormwater, but how can a client, a designer, or the intended users feel confident that the green stormwater infrastructure will perform the way it's intended or continue to do so into the future? Well, the answer to that question is a critical aspect of the implementation of GSI and has both a before and an after component. You may be familiar with sustainability assessment and rating systems which focus on evaluating design strategies employed before construction, like LEED or the Sites Initiative. But there are other complementary research frontiers, one such called landscape performance, and we can see a screenshot of a website that focuses on that here. And as stated by my colleague, Dr. Bo Yang, this process documents post-construction performance, unlike LEED and sites, which are pre-construction, the sustainable outcomes and the subsequent benefits of not only GSI-focused projects, but landscape architectural projects in general. Specifically, landscape performance is defined by the Landscape Architecture Foundation as the measure of efficiency with which design landscapes, solutions, fulfill their intended purpose and contribute to sustainability. So it's through this process of landscape performance research that scholars, designers, and clients can understand the degree to which a given GSI intervention meets the needs of the client and the intended goals. Importantly, documenting, understanding, and communicating measures of efficiency is a great way for practitioners to advocate for innovative and sustainable design strategies. Strategies that might require a higher initial investment, but over time return benefits that more than outweigh the initial costs, as well as foster sustainable outcomes. And what landscape performance research has helped us understand about the measurable benefits of GSI is that projects like this can reduce urban heat island effects, improve air and water quality, like I said, absorb carbon, because vegetation uses that carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, and improve water quality. Now, the measurable effects I just covered are clearly the environmental benefits of green stormwater infrastructure, but landscape performance research has also identified several equitable outcomes directly related to GSI implementation. I'll cover a few of those in a moment, but before that, I want to define a couple of relevant terms or concepts to set the stage for what follows. First, the matter of distinguishing equality from equity. Essentially, equity means each individual or group is given the same resources or opportunities, no matter the barriers that they may face. Equity, on the other hand, recognizes that each person or group has different circumstances and allocates the resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So as you can see in the graphic here, in terms of equality, everyone has access to the same bike, right? But because of each person's individual need, only one person is actually able to use it. Now, in the case of equity, we see all parties have been given the type of bike that is suited to their distinct needs, and everyone's now able to enjoy a bike ride. I should say that if you Google this term, equality versus equity, you'll find a ton of different illustrations, some more detailed than this and some less, that help explain the difference, and I really encourage you to do so to get a better understanding. Okay, so on to equitable development, another term that I'd like to talk about. This is an approach for meeting the needs of underserved communities through policies and programs that reduce disparities while fostering places that are healthy and vibrant. And increasingly, it's considered an effective place-based action for creating strong and livable communities. And so an example I like to give of equitable development is as follows. Imagine a city is planning a new bus route that loops around the city center, and it travels through many different neighborhoods. Some of those neighborhoods are very wealthy, and most people who live there have their own cars. Now, some of those neighborhoods are not as wealthy, and most folks who live in those places don't have cars, and they need to ride the bus to get to where they're going. Well, if city planners decided that they would locate bus stops, let's say every 2 miles along the entire route, that would mean that each neighborhood has equal access to the bus stops, right? However, if city planners analyze the data on car ownership in the city, they might realize that the less wealthy neighborhoods need more bus stops with shorter distances between each stop to ensure that folks without cars could more easily access the bus. If they did add more stops to those neighborhoods, that'd be an example of an equitable approach to transit development. Am I doing all right? Okay. Okay. So now that we've framed kind of those ideas, let's look at how green infrastructure functions as a tool in equitable development practice. So to begin, green infrastructure as equitable development means implementation to build social capital in traditionally underserved communities. Well, what's that mean? Well, social capital is the individual and collective value derived from human interactions and relationships. Societies with high levels of social capital benefit from economic efficiency and political stability, and individuals themselves with high levels of social capital tend to have better health outcomes and more economic opportunity. Importantly, residents of neighborhoods with higher than average concentrations of low income or racial and ethnic minority populations tend to have less of what is known as bridging social capital. Really, this just means that the ways in which their professional networks or social acquaintances can provide information about job trainings or other connections is less advanced. So now social capital disparities, really, they're not simply correlated with disparities to access to parks and green infrastructure, but there is evidence that adding green infrastructure in tradition can increase social capital. This is because green infrastructure and associated open spaces provide opportunities for building social capital through increasing points of interaction. One study in Baltimore conducted in 2015 by Holton and his colleagues, her colleagues, examined the relationship between tree cover and social capital and found that residents of neighborhoods with lots of trees had higher levels of individual social capital than residents of neighborhoods with fewer trees. Next, green infrastructure as equitable development also means leveraging implementation to improve health outcomes in traditionally underserved communities. While physiological, behavioral, and access to healthcare are major factors influencing an individual's physical and mental health, other factors such as socioeconomic status, race, and environmental context also contribute significantly. These latter factors are often referred to as social determinants of health. A 2001 study by Ellen et al. Found that low-income or racial or ethnic minority populations are negatively impacted by social determinants of health more than other groups and have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, cancer, respiratory illness, anxiety, depression, and overall mortality. While site-specific or even neighborhood-scale implementation of green infrastructure is not likely to address air and water quality issues broadly enough to mitigate the negative health consequences of air and water pollution, green infrastructure can play a crucial part in wider strategies to manage or mitigate air and water pollution, and therefore positively contribute to public health outcomes. Additionally, research by Kaczynski and Henderson found that residents of neighborhoods with more green infrastructure tend to be more physically active. And furthermore, having better access to parks and other green spaces correlates with lower levels of obesity. However, according to Walsh, Bryan, and Newell, it also should be noted that in areas with high levels of air pollution, increased outdoor physical activity can actually increase exposure to pollution. So other pollution control measures should also be considered. Okay. And then finally, green infrastructure as equitable development means leveraging implementation to increase economic opportunities in traditionally underserved communities. Now, economic benefits are often celebrated as positive outcomes of green infrastructure implementation. However, much of the research on the topic focuses on broad metrics such as changes in property values, increased retail or tourism activity, and cost savings at the municipal level or in commercial sectors. There's less known about the economic impacts of green infrastructure at the individual, less in the case of individuals from low income and racial minority communities. Some of the documented individual economic benefits do seem to stem from increases in social capital, as I discussed earlier, and other benefits are also linked to mental health outcomes, also discussed earlier. So, when examining learning outcomes, for instance, for elementary to high school age students, one study found that access to or simply even being able to see green spaces improved academic performance, and by proxy, educational attainment and earnings over a lifetime. Furthermore, some research points to employment opportunities associated with implementation and maintenance of green infrastructure as beneficial economic outcomes. However, according to Gordon, while many of the jobs of these types of jobs have minimal educational requirements and experience requirements, entry-level positions are typically low-paying and do not offer healthcare or other benefits, and seldom provide the business or leadership training required for career advancement. So there's more work to be done there. Okay, I've got a better graphic here for everyone. So I just also want to say it's critical to also note, I don't know if anyone's a fan of memes, but here's a popular meme that I've redone. It's critical to note that while implementation of green infrastructure has the potential to benefit low-income, underserved, and racial or ethnic minority communities, green infrastructural development should be paired with thoughtful planning, authentic community engagement, and innovative policy strategies to ensure that communities receive the benefits and are not displaced. So this is important because research shows that implementing green infrastructure and adjacent open spaces or amenities in traditionally underserved communities has the power to trigger what's called environmental gentrification, leading to the displacement of the very people who are the intended beneficiaries. Such strategies should address preservation and expansion of affordable housing stock, relieving immediate pressures on low-income tenants and homeowners, and building income and wealth among existing low-income residents. Some of the most promising strategies include using land banks and community land trusts to supplement public housing agency efforts to build or preserve affordable housing, offering tax relief or rehabilitation assistance to long-term or long-time homeowners or landlords that comply with affordability requirements, and providing monetary assistance to existing small business owners to help them take advantage of new market opportunities. And so I guess I should clarify that for the sake of this graphic, environmental gentrification, according to the Critical Sustainabilities Project, is the process whereby seemingly progressive discourse of urban sustainability is used to drive up property values and thus displace low-income residents. And environmental justice, as asserted by Hoover et al., refers to actions taken to prevent future or current harm, increase or rebuild the relational value of residents to both environment and the city, and repair the processes that have led to environmental injustices. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me through kind of all that heady stuff. But now I want to shift gears and talk about how these ideas and strategies are applied speculatively and practically in my own work here at the University of Arizona. So let's take a look at an example from an activity / presentation a colleague, Kendra Heisen, and I did as part of the South by Southwest Festival this past spring in Austin, Texas. As a bit of background, the activity was centered around helping The audience understand how landscape planning solutions can be applied as part of broader strategies to repair and revitalize neighborhoods stricken by disinvestment and structural racism. So let's have a look. Just a second. Okay, so finally I've got some good graphics here to look at. So take a moment and imagine with me, if you will, a neighborhood in a major American city. A city like Detroit or Philadelphia, for example. Such a neighborhood might look like this from a bird's eye view. Now imagine that this neighborhood has experienced disinvestment over the course of decades, that there are abandoned homes shown there kind of in the darker gray, and vacant lots shown in green, all over the place. Imagine that maybe the street lights aren't working. Oh, is that online? I think it's just, okay. Imagine that maybe the street lights aren't working, that the roads are in disrepair, and that the neighborhood school also sits abandoned because it was shut down due to funding issues. So if let's just imagine this is the school, it's been shut down. Now, although we're imagining this neighborhood, and I just created this graphic out of nowhere, the reality is that such communities exist in greater numbers than you might think across the United States. So if we were to describe this neighborhood, we might use words like those shown in this word cloud. Distressed, abandoned, in decline, deterioration, unsafe, crime, over-policed, disconnected, right? But if we take a moment to reframe our thinking and use our radical imagination to instead envision liabilities like the abandoned school and adjacent vacant lots as opportunities to meet community needs, we might be able to transform this liability, an abandoned vacant school, into a community asset and resource. A place that provides services and amenities that benefit existing residents, and a resource that starts to bring some stability back to the neighborhood. And that vision can include green infrastructure in the form of stormwater detention basins that also serve as sports fields, maybe as you can see here, that serve as sports fields, or open areas for play and gathering, rain gardens that capture runoff to support trees that shade and cool spaces where people can meet or share a meal with their neighbors. Or rain catchment cisterns that capture water for folks to use to grow food in their community garden. Now, I'm not so naive to think that a project like this can just come to fruition out of thin air. No, it would take substantial investment from the city, from developers and stakeholders to make an imagined project like this a reality, especially in such a distressed neighborhood like the one we've imagined together. However, there might be other less capital intensive investments that could also help transform liabilities into assets. Take, for example, vacant lots. Now, in many neighborhoods where vacant land is prevalent, residents use adjoining parcels as informal pathways to more easily access the places they need to go. So just like in the case of the school site, these vacant lots that are currently liabilities due to illegal dumping of garbage or crime can be reimagined and transformed into community assets like greenways or cut-throughs that enhance non-motorized connectivity within the neighborhood. And of course, in addition to paths for walking, biking, exercising, etc., these types of solutions can incorporate GSI facilities like rain gardens to provide stormwater capture, habitat for pollinators, screening of adjacent homes, shade, and general beautification. And I really like this example because solutions like this show that we don't always need to replace housing that has disappeared from distressed neighborhoods over time. Sometimes stabilizing a severely distressed neighborhood can be done in simple ways that provide what are called cues to care and leverage vacant spaces to create community amenities. Okay. Additionally, many green stormwater infrastructure interventions can be applied along public roads. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yep, public roads. And as we see here, because streets and public rights of way are the framework of our neighborhoods, they offer excellent opportunities for distribution of green infrastructure at a large scale across the neighborhood. So if we draw on our radical imaginations once again, we can envision a future for this neighborhood where uninviting and unsafe streets become verdant, shaded, safe, and appealing public amenities. And just like in the Greenways example, streetscape improvements represent development initiatives that can be, in many ways, less complex, less expensive than rehabilitating, say, the school site. Yet, these can still provide high impact opportunities for improving neighborhood conditions and addressing environmental and social challenges. And in the last example I have here, local residential streets, in the last example we saw, residential streets were transformed using green infrastructure. And the same can certainly be true for larger streets like the collector and arterial roadways that often function as commercial corridors in urban settings. In fact, in the interest of enhancing public safety, many cities are exploring what are called road diets or other interventions to reduce, calm, or slow traffic and to support more inviting and walkable experiences for non-motorized modes of travel like pedestrians and cyclists. And often GSI facilities are integrated into the design of these roadways to support sustainability goals while also providing safety for citizens. And as we advance to the next slide, again, we see the transformational potential. In this case, GSI is paired with wider sidewalks that encourage street level activity, which can be a boon for local shops and businesses. Additionally, the provision of transit stops and related facilities can provide mobility options for residents of neighborhoods who may not have access to a personal vehicle and thereby may increase access to employment opportunities. And finally, the replacement of excess travel lanes with stormwater catchment facilities both reduces stormwater runoff and calms traffic, thus achieving stormwater management efforts to reduce flooding and at the same time provide safety, a safer street for all users. Okay, a couple more. So now I think you probably get it, right? In addition to what we've already seen, other vacant lots in the neighborhood can also provide opportunities for a variety of productive landscapes that are supported by green stormwater infrastructure. Such parcels can be converted to stormwater detention facilities, gathering and play spaces, or gardens, all fostering positive social health and potentially economic outcomes. So now that little exercise that we just went through is completely speculative, and the feasibility of such a transformation might be in doubt from the start. However, through thoughtful community engagement, careful planning, and innovative policy approaches, there is potential to enact such change at various spatial and temporal scales, and to eventually transform communities that look like this, which are distressed, to thriving communities. And I believe that the value of an exercise like this is centered on developing understanding of the power of green stormwater infrastructure and landscape architectural solutions generally, enhancing quality of life for disadvantaged communities and supporting goals of sustainability and equity through practical solutions. And in the end, perhaps the next time you're in any hood, USA, which is a made-up place, I just made it up, words like this will pop into your head as you enjoy maybe a pleasant stroll along a shaded greenway or play soccer with the neighborhood kids on a field that might also capture stormwater to prevent flooding of nearby homes, or gather with friends to enjoy a meal made from food grown in the community garden next door. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time and having me into discussion and answering questions as they come. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Kenneth, for your presentation. It was very interesting and pertinent to the situation that we are currently experiencing in our region. Well, now we will have some questions for the public. and Adriana will translate for you. Bueno, ¿alguna pregunta? Ahí, por ahí están las Sofías con los micrófonos, por favor. Las preguntas pueden ser en español o en inglés, si quieren. Allá Kenneth tiene traducción para él. Adelante.
Bueno, la pregunta sería, ¿cuáles han sido los aprendizajes durante cada etapa del proyecto de estos espacios, ¿no? Las áreas verdes que presentaba o que se pueden presentar. Me refiero tanto al inicio, al desarrollo y al final, que aprendieron, que puede ser como sugerencia para nosotros, ¿no? Acá en Hermosillo. Gracias.
Thank you for your question. For me, I think the lessons to learn are that combining functionality is a really effective way to not only achieve sustainability, but some of the social goals I was talking about. So in the example I gave, using a field to host gatherings or sports for children and adults is a great way to both have opportunities for people to play, but also to capture stormwater and reduce the harm that it could cause. Now, there's other much more multifunctional approaches that could be, even more complex. But really, for a student, I would recommend think not only one single function, think of how you can get many different uses out of every design element that you're bringing to a project, whether that's sustainability uses, human uses, or uses that help provide habitat for animals, among other things.
¿Más preguntas? A ver, aquí tiene otro. Adelante.
So the question I want to ask is, how do you implement waste in a desert zone, like in Hermosillo, Sonora, or even though in Tucson, Arizona? There's no more water or time or storm time. It's like 3 months a year, so I don't know how we implement our waste.
That's a challenging question to answer, and I'm sure there's folks much smarter than I that can do a better job. But, I would say thinking, as you kind of suggest, how do we stretch out the time scale that we're able to access the benefits that we're seeking, and in this case, water, right? So, in fact, here at the University of Arizona, just recently, they finished a project to actually capture and store underground stormwater for future usage. Obviously, like in Hermosillo, here in Tucson, we only have rains for certain times of the year, and during other parts of the year, it's quite dry. So what are the solutions that I think make the most sense in that sense are ones that can allow us to capture and store and then distribute the resource at another time. Additionally, in doing kind of some background research for this presentation, I came to understand that leakage of pipes is an issue in Hermosillo, and I just thought that was really fascinating. And in my mind, a solution could be to start adding green infrastructure that might be able to capture some of that lost water and at least reduce kind of the loss overall to the system until repairs can be made to those leaking pipes, etc. So what are some maybe kind of temporary solutions also that you can do to just reduce the impact of, say, a leakage? So stretching out over time and then actually addressing kind of things that you can kind of in situ with maybe what I call MacGyver type approach.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
¿Alguien más? Adelante, Sofía.
Hi, Kenneth. This is Sofia. I have a question, which is, who will, in this example that you gave us, who will be funding the whole intervention, like the urban landscape and everything, if the community is already economical distressed?
Well, good question, and I think it's a valid one. I mean, admittedly, that was an exercise that really didn't take into account too much kind of budgetary concerns, which obviously are major constraints. I would say that the exercise I shared might be kind of something that you would do with a client kind of at the beginning of a project that's already established. In my professional work in the Detroit area, I worked on several neighborhood plans where the city of Detroit said, hey, we're looking to do some development in this neighborhood, neighborhoods that were really similar to kind of the one that I showed in my example. And so I guess I'm saying that this is a tool maybe to help start thinking about the potential possibilities when funding has already been identified for projects in master planning or neighborhood planning, and then really kind of setting the stage for, well, what are the priorities? So I guess I would also say priority setting can help with future budgeting conversations. I gave several examples of different types of interventions. Potentially, an exercise with the community and an engagement process could be determining which of those interventions are the highest priority and allocating, existing funds to kind of achieve those results first, and then planning for those other results down the line, if that makes sense. But great question.
It does make
Gracias.
sense. Thank you.
Bueno, aquí tengo una pregunta del público que está en línea. Pregunta a la doctora Glenda Llanes sobre la tenencia de la tierra. Digamos que en algunos de los ejemplos que pusiste se veía que se utilizaban los terrenos libres y bueno, eso aquí en México a lo mejor puede ser un poco problemático, ¿no? Porque pues, generalmente se expresa la tenencia de la tierra cerrando el terreno con una reja o con una barda inclusive. ¿Cómo solucionan ese problema?
Another great question, and one that I probably should, think about incorporating into my actual exercise. I think it might be different from what you're describing, or at least how Adriana was translating it. It sounds like maybe in Hermosillo there's vacant land that's walled off. In certain areas, like in Detroit, again, an example from my own work, there's not really limited access, and that's actually one of the major problems, is that a house was abandoned because the owner couldn't afford the taxes or whatever reason. It was eventually demolished by the city, and now it's a vacant lot that's completely open and accessible. And folks from outside of the city, folks, to be honest, from whiter areas, come into these African American and Black communities and trash. They dump their trash on vacant parcels that don't have fences because they don't want to pay to dispose of it properly, right? And so there's so many different problems with that. But what I would say is, in the case of Detroit, where there's not necessarily kind of the same like limits on use, people actually go out and they take it on themselves to maintain those parcels. They actually spend their own money to buy the gas to mow them, to prevent, bug and criminal kind of activity happening, which shows just how invested people really are in their communities, even though they might not have, all the resources of wealthier communities. So what I would say to the question of who owns the land is this is a policy question, right? I think that cities have the ability to actually mandate that, what's the term, negligent landowners, or there's a term for when someone owns a land but they're out of town and they're not really taking care of it, right? A negligent property owner might face either accruing penalties for not managing the land, right, and at least keeping it nice enough that criminals aren't going in there or other weird stuff is happening. But they can also use, some of the tactics that have been used to really harm people of color, right? Taking land from people that are not using it in a productive fashion, right? The community, that's a proposal that might sound radical, but in certain instances, again, especially in Detroit, people would buy land that's vacant speculatively, anticipating that somebody would eventually make a new development and that they could then sell that land that they bought for cheap and having taken care of for a decade at 10 times the value, right? So again, to come back to the question, it's a policy matter and not necessarily a design one, although, design can help inform policy and vice versa. I think there's several different steps in the policy frontier. And I know I'm sorry, this is a really long-winded answer, but I'll also say land banks and community land trusts, which may have kind of spurred your interest also in asking a question, are really important means of kind of managing your land. A land bank, the city ends up taking ownership of property and can then manage it and prevent people from buying and holding and speculating on property, and then can actually sell it. In Detroit, for example, there's what's called the side lot program. If you own a home in a neighborhood and there's vacant land on either side of you, the city has a program where they actually offer you to buy that land for really cheap. I think in some cases as low as like $1. You can buy that land and it's now part of your owned property, and you could put a fence around it and build a playground for your kids or have a garden, right? So again, that's a policy response to some of this idea of what to do with vacant land and how to manage it for the greater good. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much. ¿Alguien más tiene preguntas? Todavía tenemos tiempo. Allá, Sofía, al fondo. Ya. Adelante, Luisa.
Okay. Hi, Kenneth. This is Luisa, and I would like to ask you, as an academic, how do you see this instrument for the young architects, for her knowledge about the zoning in the urban planning, and also how this can be taken as a challenge for the new architecture, and also what's the expectations for in the future with this climate change that all over the world is happening? How do you see the scenario for our students, which I think they have a new meaning, how contribute or how to do something for the city that they are living? Thank you.
Yeah, really complex question, and I'm going to try my best to answer. But I guess I would start by saying, or rephrasing something I've heard before. The best tree was the tree that you planted years ago or something, right? Like that, right? So I guess for me, I think as students start to think through their own projects, but actually become professionals and practicing, what are the things that we can do today to really start to make the change we want to see in the future? Being advocates for, planting trees as part of projects now, I think is a good way to start. For instance, I mean, you mentioned architecture students, often in school, right? You're not going to want your rendering of your nice, beautiful building because no one's going to see the design that you did, right? But if you really think about how we sell ideas to clients, how we actually normalize some of these ideas of green infrastructure, we have to help people envision what we're talking about. So I would say, as a student, don't be afraid to kind of delve into the landscape and add some of the sustainable green features that maybe you have to do some research outside of what your professors are sharing with you to learn more about. Or maybe you take a landscape class if that's available to you. The point I'm saying is that for an architecture student specifically, showing how does a building fit into the site? Is there a green roof that you're adding to it? Are there means of kind of capturing water in interesting ways? Like here on campus, we, in our building capture water from the drinking fountains and other things. And then that's actually added into the garden. And that really kind of integrates both the site and the building in a way that's really kind of moving, and I think that really helps sell projects and the ideas of sustainability to other folks. So more trees in your renderings, I guess. That's what I'm saying.
Ok, muchas gracias. Thank you, Kenneth. With this, con esta última ya pues finalizamos la sesión de preguntas y por favor agradezcámosle a Kenneth su intervención, la cual fue, pues, además de muy interesante, creo que fue pertinente con la situación que estamos viviendo ahora aquí en la región, ¿no? Digo, acabamos de ver inundaciones terribles con muchas víctimas en Nogales, en ¿cómo se llama? En Empalme, en Guaymas, incluso en Hermosillo hemos tenido también inundaciones. Y creo que todo esto en parte pues, se puede solucionar o mitigar con la aplicación de la infraestructura verde, ¿no? Y en conjunto con la planeación urbana. Bueno, pues thank you, Kenneth. Thank you very much. And don't forget to
Thank you.
call us in your next visit to Hermosillo. Thank you. Gracias.
Great. Yeah, we'll do. Can't wait.